Let's get straight into the agenda. Initially, we are going to see what is NestJS. Later on, we are going to install NestJS CLI. I will also walk you through the prerequisites for trying out NestJS. Later on, we are going to bootstrap an application using NestJS CLI. After that, I'll walk you through the different concepts inside NestJS so that we can develop an application. So these include the controllers, the service, imports and providers, and most importantly, modules in NestJS. Finally, we are going to consume an API which gives us the name of people who are in space. So obviously, there is an API for that. We're going to use it to create this node application, which is written on TypeScript, but behaves like a Spring Boot application by exposing a REST endpoint and giving some JSON data. If you're coming from a Java background, I feel this will be easy for you to relate to a Spring Boot kind of a framework. And by the end of this video, you will realize it's almost similar to Spring Boot. I've also left the link for the chapter timestamps in the description below so that you can skip to any of these sections based on your need. With that, let's get started. Press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss any update from Tech Primers. So what is NestJS? NestJS is a framework for building backend applications in the Node engine. If you're familiar with frameworks like Express.js or Backbone.js, NestJS is a wrapper around Express.js, using which you can create scalable server-side applications, which are almost similar to Spring Boot, because Nest also has similar concepts which you can relate when you're coming from a Spring Boot world. So for Java developers, this is going to be fun, learning a new language in a new technology while learning too many other things without having to have a huge learning curve in terms of learning these tech stack. There are some prerequisites to run some NestJS application. So you need to have Node running in your machine. For example, I have Node version 14.4, which I'm going to use. I'll be using npm. npm is similar to Maven. It's the package manager. I have installed the NestJS CLI. You can run this particular command npm install -g and @nestjs/CLI. This will get you the NestJS CLI installed globally, and you can use Nest CLI to create applications and controllers and services and things like that, which I'll be showing in a bit. So the prerequisite is you need a Node engine, which is the JavaScript engine. You need npm, which comes along with Node. You will have to install NestJS as a part of this particular command. You don't have to have TypeScript specifically installed. However, when you install NestJS, it's going to bring in TypeScript by default. If you don't know any of these technologies, do head to Kaushik's Java Brains tutorial on what is Node.js to get the basics of what is Node.js, and then you can come and then try out NestJS if you don't know what is npm and things like that. These are some of the basics which you don't require to do NestJS, but if you know them, it'll be easy for you to understand Nest. Let's jump into bootstrapping an application. So I don't have to install this particular command because I've already done it. So I'll be using the Nest CLI. So for that, I can directly do Nest and then I can do new. So the moment I say Nest new, this is going to create a new Nest application for us. So I'm going to call this Nest application as NestJS example. So the whole Nest new NestJS example will create a whole new application for us from scratch. This is similar to how you create a Spring Boot application from scratch. So I'm using the Nest CLI here, and this has created by default some packages, and it's asking me which package manager would you like to use. So I love npm, so I'm just going to use npm. If you like yarn, you can use yarn as well. So the moment I click on npm, this is going to install the npm packages, and it's going to use the package.json, install the dependencies and stuff like that. So it's going to take few more seconds, and let's come back after the installation is done. So the installation is complete, and if you see, Nest provides some fancy smileys, and it's just good for our eyes as well because it just shows you what got created, what got updated and things like that. I'll show you the update later, but right now it just shows that it created a bunch of files under the NestJS example folder. So let's jump into the NestJS example folder and see what are the things which are there. I'm going to use VS Code for this because it's TypeScript. I love using VS Code for TypeScript. So I'm just using VS Code here. I'll just maximize. So VS Code has opened our code, and if you see, there is a package JSON. Package JSON is similar to the POM XML. This has different packages which you require in the runtime. So let's look at them. So there is this dependency section which tells us what are the different packages which are installed. So I'm using the latest version of Nest, which is 7.0. There are common, core, and if you see, there is something called Platform Express. By default, NestJS comes with Express as the base platform, so it's built over Express.js. However, if you think you need Fastify, you can definitely use Fastify platform as well, but I am using Express.js as a base. It also gets in RxJS by default. So this is for our observables. When we are creating HTTP APIs, by default we use something called Axios in NestJS. So when we use them, we can either use promise or observables, and when we use observables, it will be useful to use RxJS and then do some computation and things like that. I'm not going to show RxJS in this video, but yeah, it just comes by default. And there are some dev dependencies. These are for making sure we are able to run the NestJS to convert into JavaScript. This is basically the TypeScript, the jest, which is running for test and things like that. Now, if you notice the folder structure of this particular project, we have two different folders. One is the source, the other one is the test. So source has all the main TypeScript files which the Nest CLI has created. So there is a controller and there is a corresponding test. So the good part about Nest is it creates a test for you as well by default when it creates controllers, servers, or interfaces and things like that, right? So there is a module which has different syntaxes. I mean, don't worry about the syntax if you don't understand TypeScript. It's okay. So let's look at some of the main stuff. So there is a file called main.ts. So this is the file which will be hit when the application is coming up. So inside the main.ts, there is a Bootstrap function, and the application is listening to 3000 port. So we will be able to access the application using 3000 port, and the default module which is getting loaded is the app module. So app module is this particular file which gets loaded, and as a part of this particular module, you can load multiple other modules. So that's what this import commands signify, right? You can import different modules. Let's say as a part of this particular application, you have different modules. You can create multiple modules and import them depending on the type of module and where you need them, right? So that's what this import is useful for. There is something called controllers and providers. So controllers are similar to the controllers which we had in Spring Boot. So controllers will be the first point of contact when you create an API, right? When you create an endpoint which you are exposing to the external world, the controller will be the first place it will be hit. And services for creating computation or general business tasks and things like that, which you can stick and call from the controller, right? So it's exactly same, but when you use them, you need to register them with a module, right? So that's what is happening here. So by default, there are two controller. There is one controller and there is one service, which is saying the app controller is basically this class. It has a constructor and it has an object called app service, and that is being called with a method called getHello. So this getHello method will be present inside the service, and the service is just returning hello world for now. So that's it. So we have controller, which is almost similar to the same in Spring Boot, service, which is also similar to the same in Spring Boot, and if you notice, the annotations are also somewhat similar, right? Instead of service, we have injectable here, and in the controller, we have something called add controller, which is familiar, and again add get, which is also familiar. Those are some of the key files which we need to know. There are some test files as well. These are end-to-end tests. If you look at it, it just tests for 200 response with the hello world when this whether the application is coming up or not. So I'll talk about tests maybe later in another video. However, let's try getting this application up. So I have got the application up and ready. We are not going to change anything. Now we are going to start this application. Now, how do we start this application, right? So if you're using node-based platforms, you know that you can use npm to start. So you can just say npm start, and that is one way of starting it. Generally, we do npm run and then start. So when you do npm start, the start command will be defined in the package JSON. And if we go to the package JSON, so scripts. So there is this option called scripts. Under that, there is a start command. So when you do a start, internally, it's just doing a nest start. So you can either do nest start or you can do npm run start, which we are used to because we are using npm. In order to use the application in the watch mode, basically when you change some files, if you want to reflect them immediately, then you can use npm start dev, right? So we are going to use that in a bit. if you're starting it directly, you can directly use that. For now, I'm just going to use our browser to hit the localhost :3000 to see if we are able to get the hello world. Yeah, so we are able to get hello world. This is our application. Just to confirm that this is our application, what I'm going to do, I'm going to change the message to something else, but I don't want to do it, right? Because if I change it, it won't get reflected. I'm going to use the npm start dev mode, which is going to watch my files. Now, the application is looking at my files and they're watching it. And if you see the logs in the Nest application, there is a starting Nest application. The app module got loaded and its dependencies got loaded like within like 10 milliseconds. The app controller got loaded in 4 seconds, and there is only one mapping right now, which is the get mapping in the root, which got loaded in 2 milliseconds. So it gives you detailed analysis on how much time each of these dependencies got loaded and how much time they took, right? So let me go back to the controller, the service basically. So in the service we have hello world. So let me go and refresh the hello world. Yeah, we are able to see hello world. I'll just change it to hello YouTube and I'll save it. So the moment I save, you see that already this got loaded and YouTube is reflected here. So this is another feature which we have by default in the Node frameworks, right? So if you're using npm, you know that this already exists. So we are using the same here. And if you don't know about TypeScript, TypeScript is an object-oriented programming language created by Microsoft, which can convert your TypeScript code into JavaScript code, right? So the code exactly looks similar to how we write in object-oriented programming languages, and then it can convert them into JavaScript. So if you know .NET, the syntaxes are very similar to .NET, and if you know Java, they just overlay with them. So it's almost similar, right? So it should be okay. Now for the example, we are going to use a space API, like I said, right? So this is the API which we are going to use. There is this website called opennotify.org, and it just shows how many people are in space. So if I hit this particular API, see that I get a message, I get a JSON message which says message is success. The number of people who are in space is like 5, and what aircraft are they in and what is the name of them, right? I mean, these are 5 people who are in space and we are able to retrieve their information using an API, right? So I'm going to use the same API to just use it inside NestJS application so that we get to know how to develop an application within Node.js framework. Now, the first thing is I want to create a new controller, then I want to create services, right? So now let's go to the CLI. Let me open a new tab. Of course, you can use the terminal to create it, but yeah, I'm just showing it in here. So in order to create a new controller, again, you can use the Nest CLI, but this time you need to use the command generate. So you can do nest generate and you can do controller and then space. You can give the name of the folder under which you want to create the controller, and the controller also will be created by the same name. So I'm going to create a controller under the space folder, and I want to name the controllers as space. I want to create the endpoint also as space. So I'm just going to call it as space. Now, the moment I do nest generate controller, if you notice, there are 3 messages which we got. The first one is one controller got created, and there is a corresponding test file, and there is an update on the app module. So let's go to the app module and then see what happened in the app module. If you notice, in the controller section here, there is a new space controller which got added. So Nest CLI automatically adds the controllers and then hooks into the modules wherever you need them, right? So that's a good part. You don't have to manually add them and then figure out why my application is not using the controller which I added, right? So you need to add the controllers and the service into this particular space. So anyway, I know that I need a service, so I'm just going to use a service as well. So I'll just say, instead of the controller, I can use the command called service. So I'll just say nest generate service space. It's going to again create the service, and then it's going to update my app module in addition to service. So we have all the necessary files right now, I think. Now, in the service, I want to consume the API. In order to consume the API, we need to have a HTTP service, right? So NestJS provides something called Axios, right? So you can use the NestJS Axios to inject the HTTP module in the application. So there is a module called HTTP module, and I can use the module directly here. So I'll just say HTTP module, and if you see, it got automatically imported. Once I have imported the module, I should be able to inject their service, which is called as HTTP service. In order to use the service, I'm going to do constructor injection here. So I'll just say private, and I want to use the HTTP service. So I'll just say HTTP service. Done. So this got imported again. So I'll be not doing anything. So I'll just keep this way. And I need to get the list of astronauts, right? So I'll just say get astronauts. So this is how I'm going to call my method. And I need to have a return type. So I'll just say, so what should be my return type? So the return type should be an object, isn't it? So I'm going to create a new interface. So in TypeScript, you can create interfaces so that you can use those interfaces as POJOs, like how we do it in Java. POJO is a plain old Java object. In JavaScript, you can call it transition object, right? Or DTOs, data transfer objects. So I'm going to create a nest generate interface, and I'm going to call it as space, and I want to create it under space folder. So I'll just say space/space. So this will create a new interface here. Yeah, I got it created here. And what are the different fields which we have in the API, right? So let's go to the API. There is something called message, there is number, there is people. So let's create them. There is message, which is string, and then there is number, which is integer. I'll just use the 32 array, and then finally there is people. So people is again a list of some other object, right? So I can call this as astronauts, right? I mean, maybe I can call it as astros. So I'll just say it's basically a list of astros. And let's create another interface. Nest generate interface. Instead of space, I'll just call this as astros. So this is going to create another interface, and in that interface I'm just going to use my name of the astronaut, which is again string, and then the aircraft, right? I mean craft, that is also string. So if I come back here, it's basically craft and then name. Yeah, so I've just put the same, right? So the same astros is going to be used inside the interface here. So I'll just do an import here. I'll just do, yeah, so there's an auto import happened. So that's it. So we have the models ready. Now we are going to use the model here. So I'm just going to say space. This will auto import again. Once this is done, I'm going to use the HTTP service now to consume that particular service. So I'm just saying this.http service dot get. Since this is a get API, I'm going to use the URL here. So we got the message, and if you by default look at it, this is going to be axiom response, right? So in order to make this as a promise, so I'm going to convert this into a promise message using the .toPromise method, and I'll just assign a variable called response. Now when you get the response is going to have different information. We need only the data, right? So I'm just going to call response.data because I need only the data from the promise. The other thing is this is going to be a futuristic message. So if you know about event-driven systems, this is going to be a message which will be retrieved, but not now, right? It will be returned in the future. So I'm going to use async operations everywhere. So I'm just going to make this particular method as async, and I'm going to make this particular method wait so that I can get the response back. And since I got the response, this obviously will be a promise. Since this particular response is getting a promise here, and I'm making the method as asynchronous, and I'm getting the data, which is response to data. So the response will be returned only when the data is retrieved from the service, right? So that's what is going to happen. So I made the method as asynchronous. I made the response type as promise because I'm getting a promise type. I can also do observables, but then it will become a bit complicated with RxJS. I didn't want to show that. So just imagine that you're going to get a message, but in the near future, right? So that's what is a promise in JavaScript. So I'm using a promise. I'm just getting a response.data, which is going to have my JSON message. So this is what the service is going to return. So the service is done. We created interfaces. We also created a method by consuming an API. Now coming to the controller, right? So in the controller, this is where our API is exposed, right? So there is a API called space Under that, I'm going to have a get URL, right? So I'm going to have a get request method, like how we have in HTTP. And I'm going to call this method as get astronauts, the same name. And this is going to again return a promise of type space. All these will be auto imported since I'm using VS Code. So here I need to use the service. In order to use the service, we need to auto wire the service. I'm going to inject the service. I'm going to inject the service here. The service is called space service. Let's call the space service here. Open brace, close brace, because it's an empty constructor. And I'm going to use this dot space service, and I'm going to call the get astronauts method, and that's it. I'm going to return this. So I can add some messages here. So I can do a console.log saying retrieving astronauts from space. So this is just a log message which I'm adding so that you know where the log is coming from, right? So this is the controller. So I've added a call to the space service, and this is again a promise. So that's why you get a promise here, and I'm calling the method which is get astronaut. So that's it. So we have the controller ready, we have the API also ready. What else do we need? I think that's it. We also have the watchers running, I presume, right? Let me go back. Okay, so this is throwing some errors saying that HTTP module. Okay, apparently the app module file is not saved. So let me save this particular file. This is why I have by default autosave enabled, but yeah, in VS Code I don't have it enabled. So yeah, let me save the file. Yeah, I mean it's got reflected now. So basically I added the HTTP module, but I did not save this particular file. So that's the problem. Now if you notice, the new APIs which we had are registered here. So there is a new /space which is going to return the space information. Now let's go to the local host 3000, hit space, and this should return our API response. Yep. And let me minimize this. Okay, so we are able to get the message. So I assume we are able to get the message, and I can see the retrieve astronauts from space message as well. So let me see that console. So I have added a promise, and if you see that we are able to get the response from the response data. If I don't do a response data, I can maybe print the response here to show you what are the different messages in the response. So it'll be like too many messages, and that's why I didn't want to show them. Let me save this here. Let me do a refresh. And if you notice here, see, this is the message which we wanted, which is response.data. However, the response has too many fields which we don't require right now. So this will have all the headers, all those kind of information will be present here. The cookies, the configs, the headers of the server. So basically this is running on an Nginx proxy server. The response is 200. Okay, cool. So that's how the response is retrieved, and we retrieved only the data, right? The response.data. So that's what we did here. Now, before summarizing what we just did in the video, I want you to go through the documentation of NestJS. So the NestJS website is nestjs.com, and click on documentation. Whatever I just showed you, everything is there in the documentation. So you can try every bit of it. You may not find the space API because I took it from a different source. I just got to know about the API and I started using it. However, you can take a look at all the different features which the NestJS provides, and you can try them on your own. It in fact even has good support for GraphQL and WebSockets. Also, it provides open API specification with Swagger, right? So maybe if you're interested and if you want me to show how to do Swagger in NestJS, we can try doing that. I hope this was very useful. Let me just summarize what we did. Initially, we installed the NestJS CLI. Using the CLI, we bootstrapped the application by creating it from scratch. Once we got the application, we had a hello world. We added a new controller, service, and interface for consuming a new API, which is nothing but the space API. And using the HTTP module, we are using the HTTP service class to consume these APIs as a promise, and we are retrieving the data from that particular API. We are also exposing an endpoint called space using the get annotation and the controller annotations, and calling the space service from the space controller. Also, we created interfaces so that we can use it as transferring objects. I hope this particular video would be helpful for you in kickstarting your NestJS journey in case you want to give it a try. As always, the source code for this particular video is available in the GitHub repository. I will also mention the list of commands which we ran in the CLI as well in the README, so that you can take a look at it, clone it, and then use it for your own need. As always, if you like the video, go ahead and like it. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and subscribe to it. Meet you again in the next video. Thank you very much.